Welcome to Film Fights, where we don't just talk about movies, we make them fight. Today, not continuing our 80s action movie tournament. That will be happening again next week. The Fob is currently out of town. We did not George Janko him. We're back for our second episode of Chill Chats, and if you don't remember what that is, Chill Chats is essentially where we just kind of come together to talk about whatever thing relating to movies or pop culture, and we just have a nice discussion about it. A little less fighting, though I'm sure we will disagree.
Yeah, no more fighting.
Yeah, it's film friends now. So basically, we're just going to be talking about X-Men 97, going through each episode in the 10-episode season, and just giving you little things that we liked in each of those episodes, and also didn't like. Before we get into spoilers, though, I do want to give you my brief thoughts on the show. I really liked it, but it does have some significant drawbacks, which we will be getting into very soon. But if you've been starved for Marvel content and feel like that the MCU or whatever has been letting you down, I would highly recommend checking this out and seeing if that tickles your fancy.
I agree, mostly. The show's very good. It's a very great breath of fresh air because it's just very different from what we've seen before, and it's revitalizing definitely the exaggerated fun comic book aspect that Marvel started with, and pays a lot of homage to the original series, so fans of the classic one should be pretty happy with this.
I 100% agree. Now, let's get in to X-Men 97. X-Men 97 continues the story of the beloved animated series from the 1990s, picking up where it left off with the iconic team of mutants. As the X-Men face new threats in a rapidly changing world, they grapple with internal conflicts and evolving relationships. Led by an old foe, the team must confront both human and mutant adversaries while striving to protect a world that often fears and hates them. The series explores themes of identity, acceptance, and unity, staying true to its roots while introducing fresh narratives and characters that resonate with a new generation of viewers. Now, as we're getting into episode 1, I think there's just some obvious things that I want to talk about before we get into the specific details. The animation is really good in this show. That goes for action scenes, that goes for everything. The intro is lovingly recreated from the 90s show, and even though I haven't seen very much of the 90s show, I've maybe seen like 3 episodes in total, I still have a fond nostalgia for that theme, and I think that they brought it back to life really well.
I've seen a little bit of the original show. I didn't finish it, but I watched quite a bit, and I think this show pays great homage to that. The intro, I'm so glad that they kept it mostly the same and didn't. Usually I'm afraid that when they take properties from back then, they kind of water it down. But it still looks very bright and flashy. It's fast-paced and everything, and that's the most important thing. And there's just a lot of great details in the intro, and intros are something I like.
Yes.
Probably more than most people, but it was definitely a good sign that they were that they were fans of the series and that they're gonna pay some good love to it.
Going on with the 90s cartoon style, it's so gritty back in the day. They had this really harsh contrast lighting. It's not just the Marvel cartoons, but also Batman, the animated series, and so on. I really like the way these cartoons look. And I think the benefit of what they did here is they take the best elements from those 90s cartoons that at the end of the day, if you watch them, look kind of jank and robotic at times. These are relatively low budget cartoons back in the day, and they're basically bringing it up to a modern standard. You can tell they use a lot of 3D cell shaded animation, but it looks really good. And if you're going to use 3D animation, in my opinion, this is the way I prefer it, as opposed to a Pixar, which is admittedly very impressive, and I can see why you would love that style. But for me, this like hits that sweet spot where I'm like, you are combining the best elements of animation to create a very high quality product.
Yeah, usually I'm a little scared when two-dimensional show that they start using 3D animation, but this one blends it together so well. It doesn't hurt the style at all. It fits right in, and yeah, the show is completely beautiful. I think it's great because usually Marvel lately has been kind of disappointing us with how they use their budget. Not with how much of a budget the movies have, but it seems like they should look a little bit better. I actually don't know the budget of this one, but I mean, this feels like a product that should be made from Marvel because of how good it looks. It's like, this is the biggest company, the biggest studio, so they should be looking the best, and they do.
I don't know how much.
Billions.
I don't know how much the cost. I tried to find the exact numbers, so I have no idea. But it doesn't matter because it looked good, and I am not complaining. Now, getting into episode 1, it is basically trying to get all of the characters in their places, catch you up, get you up to speed, which is important for someone like me who did not watch the majority of the X-Men 90 show. It lets you know that Charles Xavier was recently killed by this one mutant-hating dude that I'm currently blanking on. The X-Men are just saving mutants that are being repressed or, kidnapped and stuff in these bases, and you get an introduction to Cyclops in this version of Cyclops. And as someone who's watched a lot of the movies, Cyclops is pretty dull and boring in the movies, and seeing him pop in this new version of the character, at least for me it's new, where he's just really cool but still has that Boy Scout leadership quality that you look for in characters like him and Captain America, more on him later actually, and Superman. They write him so well with a guy leading the team, having moral dilemmas, and they put him in this place where he is extremely cool. Optic blast has never been better on any sort of screen, and I thoroughly enjoyed him and some of the other X-Men kicking these mutant-hating meanies.
Yeah, Cyclops as a character that definitely needs to be written by someone who understands him and knows that, he is a Boy Scout, but there is more to him at the end of the day. There's another side of him, and the show portrays that very well. And yeah, all his action scenes are great. This was made by someone who loves Cyclops for the first time.
Going straight into it, like I said, it's got a good opening, them saving these mutants and stuff. New person being brought to the mansion, bringing them up to speed on the X-Men, which is good as an audience surrogate to kind of catch you up to what the X-Men are, because you should never just assume that everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah, I think you could watch the show mostly if you didn't know X-Men. It's all pretty straightforward. I think the only thing you might not know is some of their powers, but it's all pretty self-explanatory.
Other than that, it's just mutants are basically people in the Marvel universe that are born with powers that used to be human or come from other mutants. So that's the basic gist of things. It catches you up to speed well enough. I will say it is a little slower because they have to set the stage. Like I said, a lot of catching up to do, but they ended off with a really spectacular action scene where all of the X-Men are teaming up to fight this under-stealth Sentinel base where they gotta take on these mutant-killing robots made by this one evil doctor character. And there's this really cool team-up moment between Wolverine where he's teaming up with Gambit, and then this other mutant Morph, and then they throw him through a Sentinel head. That was really awesome. Yeah. Great way to end the episode. They end on a cliffhanger, whereas it turns out we all thought Cyclops was leading the team. He was then going to hand the reins over as leader to someone else. Obviously, Charles Xavier is dead. But then it's revealed that Charles Xavier left his last will and testament was to leave everything to Magneto. And now Magneto is the leader of the X-Men, which was the greatest hook because, like I said, the first time I was watching this, I was like, it's all right, this episode 1, but that cliffhanger was like, all right, now I'm in. I want to see what happens next.
That was one of the riskiest things to me, where I was like, oh, this could go really wrong and be dumb, but actually it was really good.
Yes.
I like that I did it.
And I think that's actually one of the better elements of the show, which we'll get into in episode 2, is it's just a cool idea that Charles Xavier is now gone. His old foe / best friend now has to step up to the mantle and try to honor his legacy and lead the X-Men. That is just like a cool premise for an X-Men story, and it's one that I've never seen. I'm more used to him poaching Charles Xavier's students to join his brotherhood. One thing I want to say real quick before we get into episode 2 is the dialogue. Kyle and I have talked about this a little bit. If you're someone who's more acclimated to modern senses of writing, it is corny at times. We have to remember this is based off of not only comic book source material, but also a 90s animated show course material. Yeah. So a lot of Cyclops lines, they feel like he's trying to sound very heroic.
To me, my X-Men.
Yeah. And like be like, let's go, my X-Men. You know, like the classic like Avengers assemble. You know, this is a very old school, old-fashioned way of making them talk. And honestly, I noticed it more in the first episode. I think they slowly kind of phase it out a little bit as the show goes on, but I think they're trying to stay very true to the roots in the first episode. That, or I just acclimated to it and I just got used to it, which either way is fine.
No, I think you're right about that. And there's still some great lines and good dialogue throughout it, mainly from Magneto. He's very well-spoken and verbose.
I think they do a great job making the characters with their writing, though, feel distinct from one another. Everyone feels distinct, which is, it doesn't seem like, well, yeah, they should be, but there's so many movies now where if you're like, read someone's dialogue and you know all the characters, you're like, all right, now which character was that? Who said that? You would be lost. That was a great thing that they did early on with the show that I appreciate. Moving on to episode 2, once again, we have that setup with Magneto as the leader of the X-Men, and that episode is basically him trying to garner the trust of the X-Men, and he's used to people just listening to him or not listening to him, and so him actually having win people over is an entertaining bout. They introduced this interesting relationship between Magneto and Rogue. Real quickly, my thoughts on Rogue is this is my favorite version of the character as someone who has never read the comics and almost exclusively just watched the movie, where I hated her in the movie. She still has her fair share of issues, but I think she has a lot more presence. Her voice actor, unfortunately, sounds a little old and is trying way too hard with that.
It's a little forced with the accent now.
And that goes into that more corny 90s delivery that I was talking about. It's one of those things that I just kind of got used to, and she was still an entertaining presence, and I think she carries thematic weight throughout the coming episodes, which I'll get into more as we go through them. And I like her dynamic with Magneto, where she's trying to help him gain the trust of the other X-Men, telling him, hey, you have to take a leap of faith. You can't just say, listen to me or else. And so when the UN comes for Magneto and he lifts all their helicopters up and yeah, I could kill you all right now. But then he just sets them down. He's like, all right, but if you promise to give me a fair trial, okay, I'll go in. And then the X-Men are surprised by this because he's willingly giving himself over to humans, to the government, to try and live Charles's dream. He lets them collar him as things sort of escalate, or humans riot outside of his hearing, and Magneto ends up saving the day. But in the moment, what ends up happening is Storm loses her powers to Executioner.
Yeah, he didn't believe me that the character was called Executioner.
I did not. I thought that was silly and dumb, and I forgot that we were watching something based off a comic book.
I gotta say, though, I really did like that character, because there's people on the Bird app who like that character for the wrong reasons, because they think he's really cool. I like him just because Marvel does a lot of just bringing in villains that they try to explain their side of it. They could try to feel for him. It's like, oh, maybe they're not so bad. No, this guy's awful. He's just completely racist, and all his dialogue is a lot more realistically hateful, more in line with how real awful people in history talk.
Yes, I think,
and that was really entertaining to see, just someone who's just completely hateful for them.
I think what the X-Men show does really well is telling a story on the surface level, but there's tons of meat to dive into, and there's no need to be they hate mutants just like they hate black people or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't like that.
It's you can just infer that, okay, this could be an allegory for racism or just discrimination or anti-Semitism. And so you can read into so many different things, and the story itself serves as this perfect metaphor, allegory for whatever you like, and it doesn't have to be overtly political because they just show things and things stand out. Like with Executioner, I think one of the more powerful lines of dialogue is when he's fighting Cyclops, being like, you know the thing I hate the most? Just how much you mutants whine. Us normal people feel that same way, and that is what Kyle's sort of talking about to me, where it's like, that felt very realistically angry to the point where I almost feel like I've heard someone say something along those exact lines about things pertaining to the real world. And so I thought that was a very poignant reference there. Storm ends up sacrificing herself to save Magneto, but in the midst she loses her powers in this episode. And I thought that it was interesting seeing how someone who has been shown to be super powerful in both this episode and the last episode to just lose that part of her. It felt like this shell-shocked woman who, when she's like, I can't feel the breeze anymore.
The breeze is gone. I cannot feel it, nor the moisture, nor the air. What has he done to me?
It's almost like someone who loses their eyesight, or just something that crucial to you as a person.
Yeah, it's like she doesn't know who she is anymore, really.
That was done really well. Once again, X-Men just has these little things, get a peek into what they might be working with in a real life analogy. That's when Magneto just loses his marbles and just lifts up the entire UN Senate into this rock into space, being like, you guys suck. I hate you all, but because of my respect for Charles, I'm gonna let you guys off. And so they end up pardoning Magneto so he can lead the X-Men due to his new shown empathy for humans, I guess, as much as empathy as Magneto could have for humans. It's just a really powerful moment, and I am completely underselling it with how I'm describing it, but the animation is beautiful. It's super striking. It just feels so epic, and it feels like something that they couldn't have pulled off in the original 90s show, but they are pulling off now. And I think that was done incredibly well. And you get this cliffhanger at the end where they're all like, yay, Magneto, woo, and then some random clone or something of Jean Grey shows up to their door and knocks, and it's like, oh, there's two Jean Greys. What's going on?
I really like that plot line because it harkens to some of the just ridiculous storylines of comic books that are really fun. But what I like about choosing this one in particular is that it's not simple, and what they go through, it's just complicated, and they have to try to navigate that. That was one time where I'm watching one of these shows and I'm not just like, but why don't you guys just get over it? I'm like, no, yeah, this is actually pretty heavy stuff. And I don't know how I would go forward with it.
Yes, I 100% agree, and we will get into this episode 3 now. Though the one thing I do have to say is, in the last episode 2, Scott Summers, Cyclops, has a baby with Jean. And moving into episode 3, we learn that the Jean that Cyclops had a baby with is a clone. And the real Jean is the one that randomly shows up on their doorstep. And that just creates all sorts of the conflicts that you're talking about, where it's like, we've been with this Jean and this Jean had my baby, but this is the real Jean and this Jean is a clone, which they affectionately call Madeline at this point. And that causes a lot of issues. It turns out the villain Sinister is the one that is responsible for this happening, and he's the one that cloned Jean and replaced him, and it's because he wanted the genetics of a baby that's a mix of Cyclops and Jean, which, I get it, man. That's a wombo combo right there. What I like is you get to see an evil clone version of Jean because Sinister has that control. That's pretty cool. You get to have the X-Men teaming up against Jean, which is something you don't get to see too often. Jean versus Jean, you get a psychedelic dream sequence, great animation type of things. I've always liked psychic people have battles in their mind. That was done really well.
Yeah, I'm not usually a fan of the Dark Phoenix storyline, and boy, if you don't like that, it's a rough time watching X-Men. I actually really like Jean in this show for the first time because she's just more mature, and then she has that kind of tough and fierce aspects of a mother and everything, and I think she was a lot better in this than most X-Men content.
I would say that I've never been a fan of Jean. This didn't necessarily change me around on Jean, but I thought she was This is the most tolerable, I'll say, I've seen her, at least for me personally. Moving into episode 4.
The best one.
The best
everyone's
episode.
favorite.
Best episode, episode 4.
The gamer episode. So this one's a little weird because it starts with filler, and it's one of those where a lot of old cartoons, not even super old cartoons, but some of the ones that we're not so used to now, they have 2 10-minute segments for an episode, like Adventure Time did this a lot. This one does that, and it's just kind of weird because it doesn't do it for the rest of the season, and I don't know, I kind of like it because it's like a quick little homage to it, and I didn't hate the episode, but it is a little strange.
I am a little bit more negative on episode 4 than my dear Kyle, which is saying something because Jubilee and Sunspot get sucked into a Sega Genesis, and I've never really mentioned this on the channel. I'm a massive fan of Sega, retro Sega. I have my Genesis, my Saturn, my Dreamcast, not important. But I think that it was really cool seeing that. I like this sort of Streets of Rage type of game that they're playing, just a beat 'em up type of game, I think is kind of cool. Unfortunately, it felt like this episode had no real place in the overall narrative. If you pluck it out, it's just like nothing changes, especially considering that half to 2/3 of this being the gamer episode, and then the last third is dedicated to Storm trying to get her powers back, and then they have to do another weird split episode again, almost in episode 6, where they have to try to help Storm get her powers again, when I'm like, that could have just been one episode. To its credit, if you're gonna throw in a random gamer episode, I get that you have to do it before the next one. But it does stick out. Since this is the Jubilee Sunspot episode, real quickly, I just have to say about Jubilee, not a big fan. Like I said, didn't watch the 90s show.
You're not alone.
Yeah, apparently I'm not alone. She's kind of annoying, and she's got this like teenage angst, and I'm not going to say that that's unrealistic as someone who's dealt with a fair bit of his own teenage angst, looking back and being like cringe, but I just didn't enjoy her. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that she's terrible or an unrealistic character. Similarly with Sunspot, I think he gets a little bit more interesting in the latter half of the show.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it just feels like it takes a little too long for them to go anywhere with the character. But he's not too annoying. I guess he's fine. Jubilee's the more annoying one to me. However, I tolerate her.
Well, as the world's only Jubilee fan since the original, I liked her back then too. I like the episode because she doesn't really get that much to shine with in the show otherwise. I don't know, I kind of understood it because it's like, it's her 18th birthday and it's her one day off, and then Magneto just says, nah, you gotta go to work still. It's like, just give her one day off at the arcade, man. I don't know, I've always loved her, and I loved her character design, and I mean, if I was the X-Men with the worst power, I would absolutely be totally full of myself and wear earrings with my name on them.
Well, to each their own. Moving on to episode 5, which is, in my opinion, the best episode in the series because there's just so much going on here. There's a lot of payoff and a lot of just drastic things that happen. This is our first real look inside of the mutant nation Genosha. This is my first look into what a mutant nation would look like, because they don't really ever go into that in the movies, which is more where my X-Men knowledge comes from. Seeing how all these mutants are interacting in this sort of semi-utopia, and Magneto being like, this is everything Charles and I have ever dreamed of. What's interesting, one thing I liked is they have statues erected with Magneto's face, and to mutants, Magneto really is this hero, this sort of controversial hero where humans hate him, but mutants probably generally love Magneto. And it's one of those things where I hadn't thought about, like, yeah, mutants would probably really like Magneto. He's sort of this anti-hero in a way. And
well, he's also one who's just always staunchly on their side and is just always saying, no, don't be on the human side. Like, I'm not trying to curry favor with them at all. Things have got to change, and he's always just staunchly on their side for it.
We've talked about this before, but if Charles Xavier is Martin Luther King Jr., Magneto is most definitely Malcolm X. And he's got a more aggressive segregationist approach to things. He's got a little bit of an elitist approach. Magneto, that is.
He's also very, well-read and everything.
Very, yeah.
Just like Malcolm X.
Yeah, and so has a lot of melodramatic dialogue, but he also contains this massive power. What I like about Magneto is he always feels like he is the most intelligent person in the room, wherever he is. He feels like the smartest guy.
He has magnetism just like Malcolm X did.
Yeah, that too. I remember when Malcolm X was metal bending the cities. That was pretty cool. Magneto is great in that. I would actually say Magneto has always been a top 3 Marvel villain for me. Here, he cements himself as that. Moreover, this is my favorite version of Magneto. It really captures the nuance of the character, the conflicted inner turmoil of the character, and just his love for mutant. He's not a power mongerer really that much. When he wants to do world domination, it is for the sake of mutants because of everything he's gone through. I won't bore you with too much of the details of the rest of this episode, but you get some payoff between the Gambit Magneto Rogue love triangle. I think they do a lot of interesting things with that. Like, Rogue can touch Magneto, but she loves Remy for who she is. She has a physical connection with Magneto that she can't have with anyone else, and I think that pokes at some interesting real life parallels. They go to this mutant ball. That's pretty cool. And then Cable, who is a time traveling mutant, randomly shows up and starts warning people, and you're like, oh no, something bad's gonna happen. And then boom, bombs start going off, the city's in flames, new sentinels that we've never seen have shown up, this new form, and mutants are dying left and right. Magneto's trying to save everyone. He ends up sacrificing himself and some young mutants at the end, and it seems like they're dead. Gambit sacrifices himself to stop the big sentinel from killing the rest of the mutants, and the episode ends with Genosha in flames. And when I say that I had the Kevin McAllister Home Alone face throughout the whole back half of that episode, I'm not it was seriously chills, shock, horror. I was feeling everything, and it's some of the most impact I've felt in X-Men in a very long time, since Logan back in 2017. And I mean, and it might have even exceeded the highs of Logan for me in that moment of just being like, oh my goodness. It was truly horrifying, and it really shapes Magneto's perspective of no matter what we do, people will always try to kill mutants. What's the point of trying? And you really see that ideology form.
Yeah, there's a lot of really shocking imagery and stuff going on in Genosha at that time. And I just like in general that the show doesn't pull its punches at all, and it's pretty unhinged. And that's just in comparison to a lot of other Marvel content now. It
doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
It feels very intentionally aggressive and raw, and you can feel the passion of the creators pouring themselves into this work. And similarly, how the animation is like an upscaled version of the 90s. I feel like the storytelling of what they're willing to do is also, because 90s cartoons went through a ton of censorship issues. There's only so much you can do. I know the 90s Spider-Man cartoon only has Spider-Man punching someone like 2 or 3 times throughout 5 seasons because it was so filled with censorship, and I assume X-Men had similar restrictions, and being able to have people actually die raises the stakes so much in this show. Being able to show this, not only that, just the horrifying images that they're able to display, I think also really play into that as well.
Speaking of characters dying, so episode 6.
Okay.
Favorite one.
So I was wondering, how the heck are they gonna follow up this Genosha episode, this episode 5? And I'll tell you how they do. Space. The final frontier, where all of a sudden in Star Trek, there's all this aliens fighting that we have not seen at all throughout the show, and I'm just like confused. I'm like, I actually paused to make sure that I was on the right show. That's how bad it was. I was like, I thought I just saw the X-Men intro, but did I just imagine that? Oh no, we're still on X-Men episode 6. Okay. All of the sudden, Charles Xavier walks on the screen, and it's like, and this queen of this nation is in space is like, yeah, my husband Charles Xavier, and I was like, what are we doing? Why is Charles back? I quite liked him being dead.
Yeah, it's all pretty ridiculous. Usually I like when it becomes pretty ridiculous in these kinds of shows, but this felt a little too stupid.
This was
Maybe
a step too far.
I think it does happen in the comics, but I don't know, it just doesn't have much to do with the rest of the show. I was totally fine with Xavier being dead.
Well, and him coming back raises more problems with the narrative than anything that it adds.
Because the rest of the show doesn't really need him, actually.
Yes, like I said, having Magneto leading the X-Men is kind of a cool premise. Bringing Charles Xavier back, like fine, I'll do it myself. And like he's just been on a vacation this whole time, and he's like, oh man, I just thought that they could handle it, but now that they can't, I guess I'm going to have to come back. Speaking of which, his voice actor, no hate on the guy, I'm sure he's great. The performance just did not work for me at all. I think if you think Rogue didn't sound quite right, oh man.
That the universe is very old, and all of us very young.
Professor Charles Xavier sounds so nerdy and off and lame. And anytime he says something intelligent, and you made me think of this, he just sounds like this nerdy middle schooler who's trying to act cool when he's just not cool at all.
Magneto, you need to get along with the humans or you'll be grounded.
Yes, and him coming back was, I think, by far the worst decision. The cooler thing they could have done was just have him stay dead. And I think the show would have gone in a much more positive direction. Everything pertaining to Charles Xavier in this show, in my opinion, was a miss. There is a second half or a last third of this episode where Storm is still trying to get her powers back, and there's this evil looking bird creature, and I think that was actually, it's either this or the next one, but
yeah, that bird looked really cool. It looked like something out of Studio Ghibli, because it was especially well animated. Like there was a lot more detail on it, I feel.
The way that the neck was turning, it felt very fluid.
Yeah.
I would say that one thing that I've heard someone say before is it's cool having the new animators of today growing up on anime, because you can see so much anime influence, and a lot of these Western cartoons, just as much as America's inspired Japanese cinema, America now taking inspiration back and including it in our cartoons, I think is only enhanced Western cartoons, and this is a prime example of them just adding this cool psychedelic horror flair randomly into Storm facing her mental challenges. That was really awesome. That whole arc, which I think bleeds into the next episode maybe a little bit, I think worked really, really well. Moving on to the next episode, I will say it's the episode where we start getting answers as to what's going on. We get a reveal of the villain, Bastion. We get the reveal that Magneto is still alive, being held captive. We get reveal that one of the UN ladies that have been helping the X-Men is actually working with the main villain. Get a couple call outs to other Marvel villains like Doom. Captain America shows up for a little bit for some reason, and it's one of the worst versions of the character.
Yeah, so this show has a lot of other Marvel heroes. They make appearances, like morphs into the Hulk at one point, which is pretty cool. I kind of feel it was missed. It was a miss on this show just because I don't super like that kind of fan service of just like, oh yeah, show them off. Yeah. Well, because it's all, most of the scenes are just like, oh, we see one shot of the characters and then that's it, which on one hand I think it's kind of hacky, but on the other hand it's cool to see their designs now. Like they got to draw all the rest of the Marvel heroes
from back in that 90s cartoon era.
Yeah, and like the fans haven't been serviced to that kind of thing in a long time, so I feel like it's fine.
I think if you're gonna just have obligatory cameo fan service, like this for me is the way to do it. Give you a taste of something that you haven't seen in a while, and that just brings up the warm fuzzies. I can't dispute any of Kyle's critiques because, I mean, he is right at the end of the day. It is just kind of shoehorned in there. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. However, at the end of this episode, we get the reveal that Bastion, the villain, is creating Sentinels with this sort of technovirus that infects humans, and whenever they see mutants, he can turn them on at any time, turn into these human Sentinels that are almost unkillable, if not unkillable, basically Terminators from T2. It's pretty scary, and the only person that can stop it is Magneto, who a character frees, the double-crossing UN lady frees Magneto, and he has had enough, and he just completely EMPs the entire world, keeping the Sentinels offline, and it is implied that there's mass panic going around because if the entire world loses power, so many people are cooked, and I feel like the show could have done a little bit better job showing how cooked the world was.
Yeah, they were going on Twitter about how, since if there's a worldwide EMP, then that turns off planes, that turns off hospitals, and it kind of causes a lot of people to die. I think it's overall still well written, but you need to show a lot of like consequences and the other side of things to what the main characters do. So
episodes 8, 9, and 10 are part 1, 2, and 3 of Tolerance's Extinction. I'm just going to talk about that as like one entity at this point. I'm not going to like specify which episode. Essentially, the main plot is they need to stop Bastion. They need to stop Magneto, who's keeping the power off in the world. Magneto is now gone full OG Magneto. He's got the helmet on. Action figure right here. Looks really cool. Get some of the X-Men to join his side, Rogue and newcomer Sunspot, and they go off into their rock in space, and Charles Xavier's like, no, don't do that. That's good. Be good. And they devise this plan, split up the X-Men that they have left, because some of them have left now, and send half of them to stop Magneto and turn the power back on, and send the other half to stop Bastion, who has these Sentinels that are currently offline because Magneto is keeping the power off. And those two things have a very conflict of interest because as soon as they stop Magneto and turn the power on, the Sentinels are back online. They should have planned this better. And I get that they put Charles under some stress. They show a scene where the president's like, you need to get the power back on pronto, or who knows what I can do for you mutants. Even though we've seen in the past, he's incredibly unreliable and he won't stand up for mutants at the end of the day anyway. It's like, at some point, Charles is gonna be like, all right, you know what? I am a mutant and I should probably look out for mutants. So at least what we should do is stop the guy with these killer Sentinels while they're offline when he's at his least dangerous. And then we can send full force the entire squad to stop Magneto and turn the power back on. There is a clear order of operations to the point where Cyclops has to use an optic blast on Professor Xavier because he was almost going to stop Magneto too soon before they were able to stop Bastion. Like even like 10 minutes later, they finally do stop Magneto and turn the power back on, and it still wasn't enough time, and they turned the killer Sentinels back on. And then mutants start dying and they start attacking Daredevil for some reason, even though he's not a mutant, but it's fine. And so there's just like weird things like, why didn't you plan this better, Mr. Charles Xavier? Like I said, everything with Charles is horrible. Usually I love the dialogue between Xavier and Magneto. In the movies especially, I really like that stuff. Here, it just felt patronizing and annoying on Charles' part. You see, the whole show has been building up Magneto's perspective, why you should care about his perspective, and it spends absolutely zero time on Charles to the point where Charles isn't even around until episode 6. So when he shows up and he's just like, hey, stop being bad, Magneto, and when Magneto's like,
how I've waited to say these 2 words to you, old friend. Shut up.
I was like, yeah! Finally! Shut this loser up, this virtue signaling piece of garbage. He's so annoying. And when he stops Magneto and like fries his brain, Magneto's brain, I was genuinely upset. And they try to create this empowering moment where Charles is trying to rebuild Magneto's mind and he's willing to sacrifice himself. I think that's kind of cool, but I just was like so uninvested because Charles is such a lame character who I'm like, why are you even here? Other than that, though, is the action is really good.
Yeah, the action's all still amazing. The action scenes are still some of the best here, and they're still using powers in very creative ways. You get the best fight scene in X-Men, probably, because, hey, the Nightcrawler fans, they get serviced finally. They're eating good. Wolverine and Nightcrawler fighting off the Sentinels was an awesome scene. It's very kinetic and fast-paced, and I wish every fight scene was like that.
Super well choreographed, too. They have a shot that's a nice long take where it's just kind of panning the camera around. I love stuff like that. And like I said, or I haven't said yet actually, Wolverine so far up until this point in the show, he's kind of been like the lamest character ever. And it's interesting because he's actually pretty cool in the movies, I would say. He's one of my favorites in the movie, which is good because he gets so much focus, and it's clear that Hugh Jackman's interpretation of the character really landed with audiences. Unfortunately, this is 90s Wolverine we're talking about, and he's got
He goes, Jean, you can't cheat on your husband, sailor.
Jeez, bub. Keep buzzing in my ear.
I know there's probably a lot of nostalgia for 90s Wolverine voice acting. For me, it's horrible. It doesn't work at all. He sounds really cringe. Also, his lines, like I said, there's some corny lines. I think generally it works with like Cyclops and Magneto just being very intelligent and melodramatic. Wolverine's lines are just cringe and corny in the worst way possible when they're like, you can't dismember anyone, Wolverine, and he just goes, weight loss, shing, and I'm like, what does that even mean? And every time he says a one-liner, you won't be able to unsee this now. He just shoots out his claws like it's the coolest thing. I'm like, you're not doing anything with those. You're just shooting them out for no reason.
Yeah, Wolverine's style is more like just being deadpan.
The gruff sailor Wolverine didn't work for me, but I think actually in this last series of episodes is where you get the best of him because he's not saying much and he's just fighting with cool choreography. He stabs Magneto at some point and he seems to gain so much satisfaction from doing that. Like, you can just feel he has this massive grudge against Magneto. And, you know, Magneto immediately destroys him after that and, like, destroys the bones in his body because they're made of metal. But before that, I would say that's actually a good moment for him. And the series ends in kind of a somewhat unsatisfying way because of science or whatever. They get sucked into these portals. And the cliffhanger for season 2 is that groups of the X-Men are trapped in different areas of time. I'm just so over the time travel trope for whatever reason. I'm not interested in that at all. Not a super compelling hook for season 2. Other than that, I think there's decent payoff for a lot of the characters in this last episode. Lots of spectacle and climax. I have problems. I have a lot of problems with this show, but as we'll go into now, I think that just compared to the type of stuff that we've been getting recently, you can just feel so much heart and soul and just genuine love and care for not only just the 90s cartoon, but X-Men in general. This is sort of the Marvel that I've been missing for a long time, where yeah, it gets wacky, sometimes it goes off the rails, but it just feels so sincere in what it's trying to do, and when it hits harder than almost any MCU movie.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. This one, it's not watered down at all. It's probably not for everyone, although I would probably recommend it to almost everybody. I felt Marvel cartoons as a whole were always a little bit weaker than maybe DC, but there are some really good ones, of course, and I think this actually holds up very well against most of the Marvel cartoons, and I'd say it's one of the better ones. I think it's better than the original.
Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot. I'm sure there's arcs from the original that you could point as peak, but just as a product, as a season, I think this does an incredibly good job. And outside of Charles Xavier, was really just, it came together in a great way. And I would highly recommend you at least give this show a shot. Like I said, if you get to the end of episode 2 and you're like, this show's not for me, then yes, it's not for you. But I can almost guarantee that most of you, by the time you get to the end of episode 2, you'll be like, all right, I want to stick it out.
I hope most shows now, like if they continue this style and make more cartoons for the other heroes, I hope they do this.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't mind to have a little bit of a 90s show revival. Like I said, I have so much nostalgia for the 90s Spider-Man animated series, but when I go back and watch it, I recognize that it is an incredibly flawed product.
You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
And seeing them sort of update that for like a modern audience, but get the writing better, get the animation better, have Spider-Man be able to actually punch people, that would be really cool. And I'd be excited to see that, or like a spectacular Spider-Man, that would be good as well. Thank you guys a lot for showing up for this podcast. If you like this, please smash subscribe. Join the Film Fights fans community. I don't know. I'm still working on that. Leave a comment down below. Did you like X-Men 97? And how did it compare to your favorite X-Men movie? Next week, we're going to be continuing our 80s action tournament, Big Trouble in Little China versus Beverly Hills Cop. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you later.